We are going to be talking about making tax digital. Can we ever talk more about it? Well, actually, it's probably the last thing you want to be talking about. Prefer to watch cats on TikTok or YouTube. But it is a serious thing. So we're going to be talking about what making tax digital is. So Louise is going to cover off an important matter, which is what MTD is not. That's going to be an important feature. But I can tell you that making tax digital is a different way of reporting to HMRC. And we'll talk about the semantics of when you've got to do the reporting. But top level, it's a different way of reporting. You used to do your self-assessments tax returns on the 31st of January. For most of you, apparently 85% of people in the UK still file on the 31st of January each year. But that is going to change with MTD because you're going to have to do it 4 times at least.
Well, sadly, MTD is definitely here and it's here to stay according to HMRC. So it's important you do understand what it isn't, because I think there are some really serious myths going around that are quite panicking a number of people. And one of those that I think stands out the most is it's not an early payment of tax. So the dates by which you have to pay your personal income tax bills have not changed because of MTD. You only pay once a year. And although you may be reporting, as Simon says, at least 4, if not 5 times a year, the number of times you have to pay isn't changing. And if you happen to pay payments on account, that process is not changing.
So next we've got to talk about who is affected. And there's 2 categories of people that are affected by making tax digital. Who are they?
Well, the easiest and fastest way to look at this is to think about a personal tax return. Yes, I know, sadly, more of us have seen it than we'd prefer to. But if you complete a personal tax return and you fill in either or both of the self-employment page or one of the property pages, I'm so sorry, you're likely caught by MTD. There are some key things you need to know in terms of hurdles and scale of income you're earning before you are actually for sure caught by MTD. But if you're filling in one or both of those 2 pages, self-employment or property pages, then I'm afraid MTD is definitely going to have to stay on your agenda.
And just to bring that to life, we're talking about self-employed people, whether you're tradespeople, whether you're selling things online, or whether you're selling products, services, all those kind of people will be classified as self-employed and you will have to go for MTD, but it's not everyone. So Louise, what type of income thresholds have we got to be going on to talk about? Because, well, before we do that, the one thing I do want to say is the payment of tax. You know, there is the whole thing about the myth busting that we need to do on this video. It's not, as you said, about payment of tax. So the big question is, why are MTD being introduced by HMRC? I don't actually have an answer for that because it's reporting to HMRC every so often. And we'll talk about that in a short while. But why? If you don't have to pay taxes on it. It's not like a VAT return that you have to report and pay quarterly. This is nothing more than a reporting mechanism to HMRC. It doesn't really make much sense. It'd be interesting to see your views. So please do put those views in your comments box to tell me why you think HMRC are doing this. I'll be delighted to see those answers. Louise, please tell us about the tier structure.
So let's talk about the hurdles that you need to think about for whether you are caught by MTD, and if so, from which tax year you have to start this. The first one is to think about the total gross income you have from self-employment and property, or individually. If you have both, you need to add them together. Remember, this is gross income. Don't take any expenses away from the number that you're calculating. So in the 24-25 tax year that we're in the process of filing now, if that adds up to £50,000 or more, you're caught from the 6th of April next year. Now, think about this time next year. If that income is more than £30,000, you're caught by April 27. And then the following year, if that income is £20,000 or more, you're caught. So can you see the actual hurdles are dropping, which means you need less gross income in order to be caught by this amazing opportunity.
I think it's worth saying as well, in terms of there's going to be lots of questions that we'll talk about on our webinar, which we'll talk about later. So make sure you stay tuned for that. But one thing I would say to you is that there was a lot of confusion around what income was, because people would see profits as taxable income versus gross income, which is this is based on. So when you have your SA 302 or your tax summary on your self-assessment tax return, you might see the tax calculations page. What you're not going to be doing is looking at those numbers and saying, well, I've not met this threshold, because you've got to look at the income you receive from your tenants, the income you receive from your customers and clients as self-employed, and then add those two together. So if you've got self-employment and you've got property, you may well be in this threshold. Would you agree with that?
Absolutely. And it's a really good point that Simon's making. You're looking at gross income. Gross income is the amount of money flowing in from your clients before you take any expenses into account to work out the overall profit. So please don't be confused by this. This is a really important point.
And we mentioned about £20,000, but that could drop further to zero in the future. So then everyone would be bought into MTD. So don't think just because you don't meet the 50,000, 30,000 or 20,000 threshold, you might be earning 10, but you might be bought into MTD eventually. So you might want to kind of forecast forwards in terms of where you are and what you might want to do to avoid it if you don't want to do MTD at all.
We're talking about people being caught by MTD, but there are a group of activities or businesses that are not caught by MTD. So why don't we talk about those?
Yes, and again, we'll talk about that on our Making Tax Digital webinar, which you're seeing that QR code coming up right now. So make sure that you register for that. That is going to be done November the 12th at 8 p.m. UK time. So we'll talk about all of the things that we will talk about more, but a lot more detail. And we'll be taking your questions as well, and hopefully providing you with some decent answers. But let's talk about what it excludes. What it excludes is partnership, trusts, estates of people who have passed away, and limited companies. And there was this big question about limited companies, whether that was going to be brought into Making Tax Digital. In recent announcements, it's been suggested that no, it won't be. But I rather suspect HMRC may yet again turn and say, well, actually, you're doing VAT already. We may as well bring in MTD for limited companies anyway. So I think there may be this dynamic of changing attitudes and behaviours towards MTD and limited companies. But for now, it's not. So again, let me just recap. If you've got a trust, if you've got a partnership, if you've passing away, got a state, a limited company, you are not considered for Making Tax Digital. This is purely for your self-assessment tax return only. Now, many of you may be thinking, well, how do I transition from self-assessment to limited company or self-assessment to partnership? And they are very good questions, and I want to talk about that on our webinar. So make sure you register, get your questions in, and we'll make sure that we'll answer those for you.
And we'll also bust some myths about what is and is not a partnership. That's a really important question in working out whether you can exclude yourself from MTD, because again, lots of lovely myths floating around about what is and is not partnership status. Well, it's great to know what types of business are not caught by this new MTD rule, but actually, if you are caught by it, is there any chance you can get out of it? And right now, there are 3 get out of jail free cards, but they're not easy to access, and they're certainly not going to be available to everybody. So let's talk through those now. The first one of those is down to disability and illness and medical conditions. And under certain circumstances, you can appeal to be allowed to be excluded. Again, we'll talk more about this on the webinar. The second one is then on religious grounds. And again, you're going to have to pull together, no surprise, a detailed appeal request to at least start that process with HMRC. The third is then on to remoteness and not having an internet connection. And of course, that is going to require an appeal as well, but it may not be very straightforward to secure that, particularly if you're already filing digitally as opposed to via paper. I'm afraid you may shoot yourself in the foot if you try and apply for that when actually the last few years have been a digital filing by you or your agent.
And especially if you're a tech-based self-employed person or your e-commerce, it's just not going to fly. In other news, Louise and I are moving to Inverness and taking up a religion in the Jedi Master's art, so we can escape MTD on both counts.
That's news to me, people.
Not sure the cold will suit me. Okay, so let's talk about the webinar, because that's really the important feature of today. We want to ask, I get lots of questions from you and we want to answer them.
Not only that, we'll help you understand how you can truly exclude yourself from this if one of the techniques and options is available to you based on your personal circumstances. And we really want to make sure you understand the different reporting that's now required, and also the fact that the tax return you'll fill in at the end of the year is very different. So unfortunately, there's a lot to learn, and we're mindful no one is really offering this kind of information freely and accessibly. That's why this webinar is somewhere you need to be during November. So please come join us. We'll go through all of this detail. We'll really break it down so that you understand it. We'll throw out all of the myths and bust them as much as we can for you. And we'll also answer your very specific questions. The aim is to make sure MTD is clear and you know how you're going to deal with it. That's all we want for you.
And if all that fails, we'll see you in Inverness with your Jedi robes and sabers, and we'll party the night away.